Hi, welcome to McCann Cyber Investigations podcast episode number 1. This is Mark Miller. I'm the general counsel at McCann Cyber, and we're joined today by Daniel Weiss, the managing partner of McCann Investigations and McCann Cyber, and also joined by Brett Dearman, our resident computer forensics expert. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi.
Afternoon, Mark.
We have a couple of topics today that we want to discuss. The first topic being a lot of the coverage that we've read in the media lately has been on the Hillary Clinton classified information email scandal. And there are a couple of important points that we want to discuss. Always, from our point of view, we're taking a nonpartisan view on this and trying to discuss only the technology and some associated legal issues with it. So I'll start with a little factual background, and then I've got a couple of questions for our panel members. So for those of you who might not have read about it in the news, the scandal or issues relating to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton running her own personal private email server during her time as Secretary of State. What we ended up having from an investigative standpoint was two significant issues. One being the retrieval of a large volume of emails from a laptop, and the second related issue that led to the most recent review of emails was the sending and receiving of text messages, more specifically sexting messages from Secretary of State Clinton's top aide, Huma Abedin, her husband, the disgraced Congressman Anthony Weiner. So I first want to start by circling back to the initial issue of how a forensics examiner and someone who works in this field every day would go about retrieving emails from a personal laptop. And I'm going to direct my first couple of questions over to you, Brett, since you are our resident computer and mobile forensics expert. And I have a couple of questions. My first question is this type of task, which is retrieving emails from a computer, a common task? Is it routine? How difficult is it for someone who's in your line of work?
It's very routine. Almost every investigation I've ever done has had at least some element of email, at least to the point where it's worth checking. So, and it really falls into two categories. It's people who use an email reader, like for example Microsoft Outlook, or it falls into the category of web-based email, like Gmail or Yahoo or Hotmail and that sort of thing.
Great. So at this point, I want to kind of ask you to give us a brief overview of how you would go about extracting these emails from a computer from the very beginning when you receive a laptop or a desktop computer. Tell us what the process is.
Okay. The most important thing to consider when you're doing computer forensics is to maintain the integrity of the evidence. So the first thing we do is we create a forensic image of a hard drive, whether it be a laptop hard drive, a desktop hard drive, or even a mobile device like a cell phone or a tablet. And then you do your work, you do your examination from that image, and the evidence itself gets bagged and tagged and put in a safe. Once you have that image, we have different forensic tools that we use. For example, we may use guidance software's EnCase, or we'll use Magnet Software's Internet Evidence Finder, and then there's other tools that we have. They fall into the category of e-discovery tools, like DT Search, that allows us to index what we find for quick searches and that sort of thing.
Let me stop you there and ask a couple of follow-up questions. First off, for an average computer, let's say it's just a home computer and it's got a hard drive of around 500 gigabytes, how long does it take you to capture an exact copy and make that forensic image, roughly speaking? I know there are a lot of different variables.
There are a lot of different variables, particularly the file system itself. For example, Microsoft file system is a lot faster to image than, say, an Apple Macintosh type file system. It can take anywhere from 4 hours to, I've seen them go as long as 12. It depends on the volume of data versus the volume of empty disk space, what we call unallocated disk space on the hard drive. Also, there's the prevalence of solid state drives now, which adds a whole new level of complexity to it. The good news is typically the solid state drives are smaller, so they go faster, but a lot of times you can't literally pull them out of the device like in the good old days when you had physical, rotating platter hard drives. You could open up the device and pull the hard drive out and do your image from that. With solid state, particularly the Apple MacBook Air line, the hard drives are solid state. They're chips. They're not moving parts, and they're literally soldered right onto the motherboard. So you have to have that device plugged in with a network cable and do something what we call a network acquisition. A network acquisition takes longer because it's just a slower speed. That's the long and the short of it.
In a typical case with just an average size hard drive, is it generally possible to create that forensic image or exact copy within about one workday, though?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then after you've captured that forensic image, you load that into one of your forensic software tools. Is that right?
Right, exactly.
And then from that stage, kind of tell our listeners how you would go about specifically extracting email and the different types of considerations that come into play.
In the case of Outlook, or in the case of Apple's email reader, I think they just call it Mail. That's a situation where it's a single file. I'm going to speak specifically to Microsoft Outlook because it's the most prevalent. It's a single file that stays resident on your hard drive. And once we pull the image up into our forensic software, then we can go and we can pinpoint that file and we can extract it to our local examination workstation and do the analysis from there. Now, on the other side of the coin, you have web-based email, which is handled much differently. The information is saved in web-based format, HTML files or temporary internet files, and a lot of times you get the whole money. You get the whole thing, or sometimes you end up with just fragments of emails. But we use a different tool for that. We use Internet Evidence Finder. It does a far better job of parsing out the HTML files to make it readable.
And once you've got a working copy of the hard drive, is it possible for you to filter out emails from particular senders only or with particular keywords? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The forensic tool, in this case, I'll talk specifically to InCase. You can do a lot of index searching from that tool, but in a lot of cases where the evidence is going to be examined by people other than us, for example, if we have to turn over what we find to opposing counsel or if we turn it over to law enforcement in certain cases, then we'd like to use a tool called DT Search. It does essentially the same thing. It brings over all of the information that's in that single Outlook email file and indexes every readable word, even words that aren't readable, things that it thinks are words, and puts it into an index so that you can do quick searches, and then you can filter out or you can pinpoint specific emails that may, fall into a specific date range or with certain keywords.
In your forensic practice, do you come upon cases where there are hundreds of thousands of emails? Is that common?
Sure. Very, very much so. It's almost to a point where we don't calculate it in the number of emails. We calculate it in the the size of the email file itself, and we've examined email files that exceed 10 gigabytes, some of them even approaching 20 in a couple of cases.
And so to examine a computer like the one belonging to Huma Abedin and Anthony Weiner that had some State Department emails downloaded onto it, that's the type of thing that in your view would be relatively common, aside from the political considerations, a relatively common task for a forensic expert?
Very much so. Almost commonplace.
Dan, I want to draw you into the conversation for a second, because we know there are a lot of computer forensics experts out there, maybe not quite enough, but one of the questions that I think many people are unaware of are the licensing requirements for individuals who engage in this type of work. And I know it varies from state to state, but can you comment on that just for a minute?
Sure. Let's talk about the state of Texas for a moment, where I'm based. So here in Texas, in order to do computer forensic work that would be potentially usable in court or in criminal cases, or just, technically speaking, you need to have a license. You need to have a private investigator's license. Many of the states, and it's important, I think, for the listeners to reflect on the state in which the information is being gathered. And we can discuss that in a little more detail, but if there's physical evidence being gathered on a case in Colorado, if there's a physical evidence being gathered, physical drives, digital information being gathered in Oklahoma, in Maryland, you need to be thoughtful about the regulations about where the acquisition is taking place. Some of the forensic reviews, some of the email reviews, some of the e-discovery work may be done at a central location, but clients certainly don't want to get into a situation where they have, quote unquote, illegally got the information gathered, and now it's going to be thrown out of court for some sort of regulatory reason.
In your experience, and I know you interact with a lot of different clients and corporations and at conferences, do you feel like that requirement to be properly licensed is well known in the legal and technical communities, or is it come as a bit of a surprise to most people?
The people in the trade, the forensic examiners know it. I'm surprised by how often I still find that attorneys are unaware of it. I'm even surprised sometimes by law enforcement people that aren't fully aware of it until it's kind of too late. I am hearing a lot more examples of lawyers that are aware of it using it against their adversaries who are unaware of it.
And certainly it could be used, as you mentioned, in a courtroom setting to perhaps keep one side's expert from being able to testify or from their findings to be presented to a judge or a jury. So certainly an important consideration to keep in mind whenever you're doing any sort of forensics work. It can be in a trade secret theft investigation. It can be in a HR internal investigation. It could be in a hacking investigation. In a non-compete investigation, you should always keep in mind that whoever is locating and retrieving that digital evidence for you, make sure that they're licensed appropriately so that that information, unfortunately, if it comes to that, can be used in a courtroom setting. Well, let's move on. Oh, sure, Dan, go ahead.
I have a question for you. As a former assistant U.S. attorney who worked on digital cases on computer crime, when the Clinton Part 2 email scandal here broke with the Huma Abedin and Anthony Weiner case, how often did you see cases that touched, from local, what initially appeared to me to be potentially sort of a local NYPD case of potential underage contact with Weiner that all of a sudden kind of gets twisted into federal cases? I think a lot of people are sort of unfamiliar with the way that might have worked kind of under the hood.
Sure, that's a great question, and I'll answer it, and it kind of segues into our next issue, which is in the most recent chapter of the Clinton email investigation, what we understand is that, in fact, some portion of the NYPD was investigating Anthony Weiner for his sexting activities with underage females, and that ultimately led them to look at this computer that was shared by Anthony Weiner and his wife, Hillary Clinton's top aide. And so they kind of stumbled into what they realized was a significant federal investigation. So that's how we got there from a factual standpoint. To answer your question, in a place like New York, it's certainly common that state and local investigators will work on the same case with federal law enforcement, whether it's Homeland Security, FBI, or Secret Service. So they all know each other very well, particularly when they're working in the same area, whether it's national security or computer hacking or things of that nature. They know each other. In fact, they might even be on a task force together where they're co-located and sitting in the same building, even though they're employed by different entities. So it's certainly not uncommon for state investigators to turn over a case to some federal investigators when they stumble on that type of evidence. And frankly, that usually goes fairly well and without friction. Occasionally, you might have a disagreement over who's going to handle a particular case, whether it's something that the feds are going to proceed with or state is going to proceed with. But in this particular case, I think it was clear that the Clinton email investigation was going to be handled by the FBI. So it's not unusual, fairly routine. It just required the law enforcement agents to get a second search warrant to search for different information than they had been looking for, which...
Well, and Mark, let me ask you this real quick, is this case isn't over yet?
Well, one would think that if some classified emails were potentially found on Huma Abedin's computer, that the potential exists for someone else to have done the same type of thing she did, which was try to set up their email or their Outlook account on a home computer and inadvertently or intentionally, whichever it is, download a bunch of email information. So it's certainly possible. Obviously, with the way email works, there's more than one copy of any email that's sent. There's multiple copies, and you never know how many other people did the same type of thing that Huma Abedin did. Whether we'll know about it, whether it will escalate to another federal investigation, that's anybody's guess. But certainly email has a nasty tendency to kind of stick around.
What you're saying is you have to break the potential people exposed are potentially Clinton, potentially Abedin, and then the whole separate issue with Weiner. That when you say if it's not going to proceed, you really have to check all three boxes.
I think the way I would look at it would be that the Anthony Weiner sexting investigation is totally separate. But as to the Clinton portion dealing with classified emails, you'd have to look at how many of her other employees who use that private email server, they certainly could have done the same thing that Huma Abedin did. And you'd have to wonder whether all of those people did the same thing. Now, all of that being said, it certainly looks like the FBI took two bites at the apple and came to the same conclusion on both occasions. And so I would find it extremely unlikely that under the current administration and current director of the FBI, that they would actively seek out anything else. I think they closed the book once, they closed it a second time, and I don't see them intentionally reopening it. The second time it got reopened, really, it kind of landed at their doorstep through no action of their own. The other investigators obviously stumbled on the information and felt compelled, as they should have been, to present it to the FBI. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's, accurately where we are. I'd be very surprised if that investigation is actively reopened. Of course, there's no legal bar on that. A new attorney general and or a new FBI director could do that. There's no double jeopardy attached to it. And so only time will tell after January 20th to see if President-elect Trump were to do something like that. He's, of course, making statements in the press that he is not going to do something like that. So let's just touch briefly on kind of the impetus for the second Clinton email investigation, which is the Anthony Weiner portion of it. And one of the technical aspects that came up that we found very interesting was he was sending text messages and using messaging apps to sext with some underage females. And I have a couple of questions for you, Brett, in regards to what are the forensics capabilities related to mobile and tablet devices? Can they be imaged? Can text messages be recovered? Can deleted text messages be recovered? Can you help us out with that?
Sure. Deleted. Let me start with deleted text messages, because I think that's one of the biggest question marks in most people's minds. Deleted text messages hang around on your computer or on your handheld device for a long time. What happens, and I'm going to speak specifically to Apple's process, the iPhone upgrade. Whenever they do an upgrade to their operating system, the iOS, what part of that process is that it takes whatever data you have, and if it's flagged for deletion, it deletes it. It just leaves it alone. And so anything that's active, it backs that up, wipes that portion of the phone out, reinstalls the operating system, and then puts all that data back again, sans the deleted stuff. So when you say, yeah, I can recover deleted text messages from an iPhone, well, that's only as good as the last iOS upgrade. So as a consequence, it's when somebody says, yeah, can you get deleted text messages? Well, I have to answer maybe, because there's a lot of variables there. The approach with Androids varies from vendor to vendor, but it's pretty much the same approach. To take it one step further, though, in a lot of cases with Android-based phones, you can do something that we call a physical forensic image of that device that's effectively treats it like an entire hard drive. And going back to what we first talked about, you image the entire hard drive from first bit to last bit, and that's including that unallocated disk space, that empty space, where files may have used to have resided. I guess that's the right word, resided. Anyway, if they're gone, that doesn't mean that you can't find remnants or artifacts of those text messages in that unallocated disk space. So that gives you a little bit of an edge going that direction. Then to complicate it all, then they've started introducing hardware-based encryption. So that kind of complicates the whole physical image process. It's still doable, but you have to know the unlock codes to make it work.
So to summarize, text messages or messaging apps where the messages haven't been deleted, those are certainly easily recoverable in a forensic setting?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not talking about the applications that are third party, like, for example, WhatsApp or Snapchat, those kind of things. Those applications they take measures in order to protect that data as it resides on the mobile device. So sometimes you can capture images that have been sent that are temporarily stored on the drive, but the whole point of those applications is that when you say it's deleted, and it's encrypted from point to point. The whole purpose of Snapchat is to be able to send a picture and not have to worry about artifacts staying on your device. Now, in the truest sense of the word, that's not always the case. There's lots of ways to circumvent that, inadvertently as well as on purpose.
Well, Brett, this is Dan. That's an interesting point, because in this particular case, not only did he use normal text messaging, it appears, but he also used some sort of self-deleting text service, it appears. And some of the evidence that what I've seen has been used against him were photos of the text streams.
Yep, that's exactly right. One of the quickest ways to collect evidence of something going on, as in this case, is to do a screenshot. You do a screen print of whatever happens to be on the screen of the mobile device, and it saves it as a graphic image. In the case of Snapchat, you can have a picture up on your screen for that very brief period of time that Snapchat allows. And if you try to do a screen capture or screenshot of that picture, it alerts the sender that a screenshot has been taken. So at least, there's some notification going on there. Again, it gets stored into local memory.
Well, very interesting. And I have kind of one follow-up question for both of you, and that is, from your viewpoint, your forensics work and the work that you see come across your desk, what percentage of it is related to laptops and desktops versus mobile devices? And mobile devices, I'm including, iPhone, Android, and tablets. So what do you see as the breakdown in your practice?
I would have to say mobile devices, it comes and goes, but in an average sense, I'd say probably 40%, and then 60% laptop, desktop. How's that sound to you, Dan?
I agree.
Great.
I mean, it also depends, Mark, on the type of cases. The commercial litigation cases, non-compete IP theft cases, definitely more, desktop, laptops heavy. The more domestic cases, more mobile centric, but there's always a blend between the two. Certainly, we've made plenty of good non-compete IP theft cases from mobile devices. We've made them from when mobile devices were hooked up to laptops and backed up, and we recovered the backed up files on the laptop when the person thought they had destroyed the mobile device.
Yep.
Yeah, also a very common investigative technique, right, Brett?
Absolutely. Yeah, that iTunes backup is a real gold mine sometimes.